quite right, that's part of the member support that should be there. So you've got that little amount of money that you can do things with, and there was a lot of housekeeping to be done. I mean, we had to stop the water pishing in the roof. I mean, once you've decided you're going to stay in 15 Rutland Square, you stop the roof leaking, and you stop the windows rattling, and you actually try and make the accommodation for meetings reasonably pleasant. You do all of these things, which actually cost a bit of money, but it has to be done because you're talking about, you know, ensuring that, you know, your largest and most precious asset, which is the building itself, is actually doing the absolute maximum that it can to deliver. But that's a sort of local Edinburgh thing. You do things like, you know, a reasonable quality, I hope, publication that goes out 4 times a year. I think 4 times a year, Ian Wall was advocating a monthly. Now, a monthly, apart from the fact that it would have killed me, is too often. I think quarterly is really quite nice, and the feedback I get is that the quarterly, because you're only getting 4 a year, becomes a wee bit of a special event. It's not like your AJ every week. It's like, you know, let's sit down and really spend a wee bit of time. We distribute this. We don't just distribute this to the architects, our members. We distribute this to every politician in Scotland and to opinion formers throughout Scotland. And we have a huge additional database. And the really interesting thing is the number of times I've picked up a copy to hand to somebody after a meeting. They say, no, I get the quarterly. And in fact, I really like the article about such and such. And the fact that they not only get it, but they can refer to something in the most recent edition demonstrates that they too are appreciating it. I met an MSP, somebody I'd never met before, yesterday on the train. I do a lot of lobbying on trains. There's an MSP, I'll sit there. You know, and they're going, no. But, you know, sat down, chatted to this guy, and he said, oh yeah, the RIS, I get that magazine. And I'd never met the guy. And he again could say, oh, it's great, you know, and we get so much stuff that goes in the bucket, but most people keep that. You think, yes. So that's the sort of endeavour. The new website, once we get it fully up and running, it's huge. It's like, you know, Encyclopedia Britannica scale website, and you're trying to make it all things to all men and women, and its range is extraordinary. And by the time we get our new practice and projects directory up and running, and that has to be into next year now because we're back in the subscription round, and I don't want to be hitting the members for too much money all at once or they'll all abandon ship. But you know, the idea that you pay maximum £150 for 5 years, and during that 5 years you get your own discrete website. It has all your project information, the practice philosophy. It has 500-word descriptions of up to 15 projects for the larger practices. Could be 5 projects at a much lower cost for a small practice. And that's your own discrete website, and we will have 1,200 of those all pinned together. I mean, I know there's a computer word, big thing. And effectively that optimizes the whole thing on web searches. It also means that you've got the most compendious record of contemporary Scottish architecture that people will be able to use for all sorts of reasons, hopefully far and wide for commissioning Scottish architects. So that's a sort of little incremental thing. The political lobbying, we're doing one big push at a time. So the first big push was the Scottish Futures Trust. We eventually, after a lot of kicking and screaming, got them to raise their project threshold from 750k up to 3.5 million. That's really relevant for SMEs, not just for professionals, but for all the contractors and suppliers within the industry in Scotland. So we've got that as, you know, first concession. The next big push is on procurement, and we are working hell for leather at the moment to put together a really detailed, almost an expose on the faults of too much public procurement in Scotland, which is massively over-egged and creates all sorts of additional costs to the system that the system cannot bear, and it also creates additional costs to the profession. So there's a whole series of moves, and there's a strategy that you've got to contribute to for the next 5 years. And of course, 2016, we are 100 years old, and we just have a year-long party. But we also, there's a lot of legacy stuff to come out of that. And we've got the Scottish Government support for that. We'll be formally, John, asking for the local authority support. You know, we're building Creative Scotland's on board, the National Galleries are on board, the National Libraries are on board. You know, we've been gradually sort of, and we're 5 years out, so we've got time to do something on a really substantial scale that will get everybody in Scotland not noticing what opera and Estrada and Manu and Dirige means, but actually paying attention to the architects in Scotland and, you know, hopefully beginning to understand more profoundly what architects and the people who work in the built environment actually deliver on behalf of Scotland. I got stuff in yesterday from Dennis O'Keefe at NHS Fife, and while I don't understand quite a lot of it, the upshot is that he can demonstrate that the work that Richard Murphy's practice did for him on 2 large-scale dementia units has reduced both the physical intervention, literally holding people down when they're kicking and biting and screaming and in emotional pain, because these are for long-term dementia sufferers. These are people who are not going to be leaving. They're in there until they die. So they're effectively in a very nice prison. But he also said that it's massively reduced the need for chemical caution. And the outcomes from that the politicians will understand are you reduce, you know, the need to hold people down, physically restrain them. You reduce chemical caution. There is a direct cost outcome by creating a high quality environment, because the only difference between the treatment they got before in a quasi-ward setting and the treatment they receive now in a much more domestic scale friendly setting is the quality of their built environment, and that's demonstrable. And we've got specific financial outcomes on the back of that, and that's great evidence. My argument would of course be, well actually these people are very much happier if you're not holding them down as they're kicking and screaming, and you're not giving them as much chemical drug intervention. That has to be the big positive, and that deserves to have extra money spent on it, but then I'm a poor emotional sap and not a politician. The politicians will understand the financial argument. And the other thing is, you hugely improve the well-being of the staff, because they're not having to hold people down, they're not having to inject really heavy dosages of drugs. And I mean, I think that is a fantastic worked example of just what, I mean, if you expand that notion into everybody's living, working, leisure environments, you know, it has to be clear to politicians that, you know, you build good buildings, you actually get happier people, and you get better outcomes in the, you know, financial sense. So that's what I think.
On the notion of good buildings and happy people, I think that's, unless somebody's got a burning question, I think we should show our appreciation for Neil's time. Thank you very much.